how to get started with automations a lot. And I think the easiest thing to do is be really cognizant of your day. And even if you need to set like an hourly reminder, I always tell people go to zapier.com/apps, put something from your tech stack in there and just see what the triggers and actions are. Because chances are you're going to see something that looks familiar, like with QuickBooks, create an invoice, putting a reminder to think through, hey, did I just do anything repeatable? Did I just do anything that I can put into an if then statement? This might be something that doesn't require a human to move data from point A to point B.
Grant, what is up, my friend? Welcome to the show.
Dude, thanks so much for having me, man. This is awesome.
So, where in the world are you at this point? Are you back in Europe?
Yep, back in Madrid, co-working spot here in the city. So happy to be back.
Nice. So we were just chatting, and you said that you are a free man. What does that mean? What were you doing? And I'm really excited to chat about your story and some of the things that you're up to now. But let's back up. What were you doing prior?
Yeah, so
Or how'd you get started here?
you're one of the first people I'm telling on a podcast. This is so fun. So
Let's go.
yeah, last week ago, about a week ago was my last day at Hampton, the private founders community. I was the first employee there for about 18 months, servicing all things automation. Although I did a little bit of time on the sales team, which was pretty funny, and met a lot of really great people. Worked with some outstanding people. But over my time there, I kind of saw that automation was always a bit of an afterthought for a lot of founders, and a lot of them didn't really put that much time into learning what automation can be and can do for the company. And so my whole premise with kind of leaving Hampton and going full time into my own automation consultancy is kind of exposing a lot of people to what's possible with these tools when they actually talk to each other, which I think is a really powerful, frame to put it through. And then along with that at Hampton, learning just what what successful founders need to be successful and the steps that they take, what they prioritize, all that good stuff. Happy to jump into any of those lessons, but couldn't give enough high praise to Hampton.
Yeah, I wanted to start there actually because for those who maybe don't know, Hampton's not just for any entrepreneurs. It's pretty proven track record of. I'm not sure the qualifications or the requirements to join that, but can you just speak about? I guess first off, when you were starting there, early employee, what was most surprising, and like who are some of, not necessarily their names, but the personas of some of these entrepreneurs that you're working with.
Yeah, I think one surprising thing is that there's a million ways to make $1 million a year. So that's like the core requirement that I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are familiar with is that Hampton founders have to have at least $1 million in run rate or raised $3 million for their company. And so that's like the financial metric. And there's interviews and all that other good stuff. But I think the curious thing is that so many people realize that once they kind of have their idea, it's really just finding the market and then going all the way into that. So one guy is selling software for trash can pickup. Another guy has a phone where you dial into the phone number, but the company phone number, essentially that type of business. And he just started a trash pickup delivery service. Like he's now a garbage man, and everyone's just another person LSAT tutoring, doing over $1 million a year in LSAT tutoring. It's just crazy to think that there's so many different ways to make $1 million. So once you kind of find that thing that you love, that you're good at, and someone will pay you for it, you find the market demand, you find the people that have the pockets to pay for it, and all of a sudden, with time and good strategy and effort and all the other good things, you can be at $1 million revenue business. It's just nuts.
Right. So you had all these interesting businesses and entrepreneurs, and you were the automations lead or
Hmm.
consultant. What if you had to distill, like what were some of the top requests that people with these businesses were overlooking or just didn't realize were possible, or just quick wins that you would set up for them, or how did it work?
Yeah. So being the automation lead for the first year at Hampton, I was the only one building automations. And so we were always focused on how can we make the sales team's job really easy, like very clear data flows, very clear process and automation, and then the client onboarding experience. So, or the membership onboarding experience. And I think those things can be taken really to any business of like, how can I make it as easy as possible to generate and collect revenue? And then how can I improve that member, client, customer experience with what happens after they've purchased and given you the money? And how do you make them feel really good in the first hour that they're a customer of yours, and making that kind of magic moments as you can weave them into the first 48 hours and so on. Those are really two things you can take to any business, whether you're selling purses online or you are selling $50,000 a month digital services.
Right. This is more geared towards your company,
Hmm.
Hampton, of how do you make the sales process easier to perhaps qualified leads, and then once the sales has happened, how do you make the onboarding process easier to get them into the community? And then was your focus mainly just on Hampton, the company, and those operations, or would it ever extend into the different members and their businesses?
Yeah, good question. So most of my focus was around the Hampton team and trying to make our internal ops much more efficient. And then when members in Hampton would write, questions about automations or different, rarely are people ever asking, "Hey, has anyone ever automated this?" It's like, "Hey, I've got a huge problem with accounts receivable where I have no source of truth. And, I'm billing in Stripe, but I'm
Mm,
doing accounting in QuickBooks, and like I don't know where the data is accurate, and neither does my bookkeeper, and neither does my COO." And like, that's not an automation question. That's a business problem that then I would come in a Slack message and be like, "Well, did you know that you could send the information from Stripe to QuickBooks and then have a Airtable or a Google Sheet that kind of tells you the status of all those things?" So it's more commonly a business problem that people don't know can be automated. And I wanted to kind of show them the Zapier page or whatever it is that shows that these things are possible.
right. And then at a certain point, you kept on seeing this happening of you're seeing the value of these automations and sort of this opportunities that are everywhere. When do you remember when you had that initial inkling in your brain that's like, whoa, maybe I could do this just for myself on my own?
Yeah, I had someone reach out. His name is Brandon. He reached out on LinkedIn right around June, July last year, and was like, "Hey, I see that you're doing some cool stuff with Hampton on the automation side. I've never really seen someone do just automations work. Like, can we get on a call?" And so over a few instances, he was interested in automating some of the stuff that he was working on. I was like, "Oh, this is pretty wild. Someone has contacted me asking for work at something that I find, quite fun and engaging. Um, let's see what else we can do here." And so then that kind of led into another person that he referred to me, and they kind of trickled down effects from talking with Hampton members and seeing, "Hey, like I just proposed this accounting automation. Do you actually want that thing built?" Or they would ask me for additional resources, and that kind of led into a few engagements too. So it really was all inbound and has been for the last year or so, which has really led me down this path.
That's great. The so I want to before we transition into like specific tactical tools and workflows and how anyone could get started today.
Mhm.
Um, I first want to pause and go back. I know we've chatted before, and can you share a little bit about your story? So people listening to this might be like, "Oh, whoa! Like Grant's just like he's a an automations guru and he knows all this stuff," which is true today, but perhaps it wasn't always true when you were first getting started. Like, how did you first get started with this automation stuff? Were you born with all this inherent knowledge?
Well, that's super kind. No, so the the entry story into automation, I think, is pretty similar for a lot of people, where you kind of have this if then statement that comes to you. And I'll talk about how I got involved with Hampton, but the actual learning of the automations is all about what is the thing I'm trying to automate, and then going to the documentation, going to the forums, wherever it is, where some of those answers can hide, and they're actually not that hidden. It's really just a curiosity that kind of drives you to build your first automation, and then you keep rolling with it. But I'll make that more tactical by saying, when I started at Hampton, I had applied to be a member because I was working on a sports betting hedge fund, and that's a fun story. But I was
Mm.
trying to get into Hampton as a founder of that company, and when I did my interview, I said, "I've got no revenue. Can I wash dishes for my dinner? Can I essentially work off my annual dues?" And the founder, Joe, was like, "No, thanks, though." And so I followed up by email after I got denied. And I was like, "Hey, is there any chance that you have any work that I can do? Let me know." He said, "Email me next month." So after 3 months of me emailing, he said, "Do you know anything about Zapier?" I said, "I've always wanted to learn. Like, do you have anything?" And he said, "Sure." So he gave me five essentially if-then statements of if someone pays in Stripe, I want it to show up in Airtable. If someone gets marked as qualified, I want to update HubSpot. Like very clear trigger and action. And with those five, I just kind of went into the forums, went into Zapier's help desk and everything, and built them out and muscled my way through the first probably like 5 to 15 before, 5 to 10 before I started like really getting the grasp of it. And I studied engineering, so I had kind of like that logical process order. But I always tell people I'm allergic to coding. I hate it. It hates me. I've tried 3 languages, nothing sticks. And then I found no code. I'm like, oh crap, this is awesome. This is pretty cool. I could build stuff. Like this is awesome. And so that really led into my time at Hampton, and they kept on giving me more and more complex things. And then I ultimately got a full-time job after a month of being a contractor.
I love that so much. Where one of the biggest principles I've observed and have implemented in my life is the idea to just start where you are. Where oftentimes, speaking for myself, it's like, oh, I got to do this, I have to do this. Other people are doing that. Where if you really deconstruct, any high performer or success story, everyone started somewhere. And similar to your story, where people might see what you're doing today and be like, oh, he's an expert, and that's true today, but you started with just those initial if then statements. And I like how you were talking earlier about just finding the problem, and they probably aren't going to be served to you as, oh, here are five if then statements, will you go now automate those? And perhaps now you've formed the skill to, just knowing what you know, see the world in a different way, where you're always looking for problems. And then, the same way that you can, translate a language, you could translate these problems into automations. And so I guess I want to next talk about what are just very, if someone was listening to this, a lot of, listeners might be working full time at their job. Maybe they're a solopreneur and they have a bunch of ideas and just don't really know where to get started. Let's start like super, super simple. What are some interesting ways that people might get started with some automations for themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I get asked like how to get started with automations a lot, and I think the easiest thing to do is be really cognizant of your day, and even if you need to set like an hourly reminder on your phone or an alarm, just to kind of take a step back and say, what did I just do that was repeatable? Because so
Mm.
many of us don't have any structure around the if then statement. They don't know, they haven't spent time in like I always tell people, go to zapier.com/apps, put something from your tech stack in there and just see what the triggers and actions are, because chances are you're going to see something that looks familiar, like with QuickBooks, create an invoice. Pretty standard action that I think a lot of people will do. And so if you're aware of it, great. But if you aren't and you don't have that structure, putting a reminder to think through, hey, did I just do anything repeatable? Did I just do anything that I can put into an if then statement? Then I can start to think through, okay, this might be something I can automate. This might be something that doesn't require a human to move data from point A to point B. Or did I just copy and paste something that I copy and paste regularly? A lot of things around the CRM, project management, accounting, there's a ton of repeatability there.
Right. And even just like for literally anyone, the if then could start out of, the trigger just being a time of day, right? And
Totally.
so even if it's just a simple Google sheet where it's like, here's my priorities for the day or week or whatever, and send that to me via email or text or set up a form. I think that just initially getting into there, I like your recommendation. Just look at the familiar apps. If you use Google Sheets, if you use email, if you use Airtable, and then looking at the world, at your day or the world that's filled with unstructured information, and start to
Hmm.
think of ways to perhaps structure it. And to that end, how would you recommend, say, if we could just kind of go through a handful of specific examples? So,
Yeah.
say that I think I read one of the first automations, or one of the automations you set up for Hampton was, um, whenever a new teammate, I think maybe it would join, there's an introductions channel. We have a similar channel at AppSumo. So I guess for this example, let's consider somebody who works with a team and they have Slack and are perpetually online. And I think you set up just a simple follow up automation in Slack to read that message and then do something in ChatGPT and ask a follow up for suggested other channels. What what would you recommend people to do if they work, if they're in this position and they're like, okay, I want to get started with automation, maybe do my own thing later and set up a consultancy and all this stuff, but I'm going to start where I am, and right now I see, like, I'm going to start to look at inefficiencies in my own company. Would you look at Slack? Would you look at like specific process points of, okay, new hire, what do we do? Okay, new client, what do we do? What are some, like, maybe simple wins that people could look for there?
Yeah. So here's a really good one that I think anyone can get started with today. Go make a Zapier account, free account, or I think there's a 14-day trial on Pro. If you have a project management tool or a to-do list app, Trello, ClickUp, Asana, any of these, could even be a Google Doc, doesn't matter, any sort of to-do list. Go to Google Forms, make a Google form that has one field for title, one field for responsible party or person. So that could be you, it could be someone on your team, and then description and attachment. So file. Make that form and save the link to your home screen on your phone. So whether it's like an iPhone, save it as an app. And you can just do that with Safari. So that every time you click on that app, it opens up the Google form. Now, when you submit it, that will be the trigger, and you can go into Zapier and then send those results to your to-do list. Because one problem that I have is I'll go into my notes app and I'll write down an idea, or could be a business idea, it could be something I want someone on my team to work on, and I never look at it again.
Right.
But in this way, I have an app in quotes on my phone that I can fill out with a title, who's responsible, and the attachment's key because if you're on your phone, I'll often see a tweet that I want to save, or like
Mm,
something that I want to take a screenshot of. So you take that screenshot and you add that as an attachment, and that goes to your Trello card, your ClickUp thing, whatever it is. So this is a very simple two-step. You can make it on a free account, sends information from your form to your to-do list. And then from there on the to-do list, you can delegate it out, you could prioritize it, you can do a lot with that. And so I think that's a very approachable thing. And if you want, I can get into the ChatGPT one with Slack and everything, and that's a little bit more advanced because it uses OpenAI. But I think that for something really approachable, that simple to-do list information, that'll teach you how to map fields. So you're mapping the Google Form field to the to-do list app fields. I think that's a really strong way to start.
I love that. And just sort of for somebody who's listening to this and being like, okay, yeah, the automation stuff, and I'm really busy. To zoom out a second here, I've studied some of these other, what would you call yourself, an automation consultant or
Mhm.
process
Process
automation consultant?
consultant. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And the like one of the examples, let's say, find somebody who has um, a very, like, high income, spending customer, for example, like a law firm or a a wealth management company, and they get tons of leads for, at any given time on their website, inbound, and they don't have a great way to qualify those leads. They got to pick up the phone and call them. And so, like, one just random example is, well, what if you have the form, you have a way to ask follow-up questions like, oh, I was in a car accident for a law firm,
Hmm.
and use ChatGPT to read through and say, did they fill it out all the relevant information? No. Automatically send an email that says, okay, hey, were you in the car accident? Was it your fault? Do you have insurance? Well, like, all the things that they need to do. Otherwise, they just don't have the capacity to follow up with those leads. And then, through this simple automation, you're able to, um, potentially add, five, 10, $30,000, of new revenue for this law firm, and you set this up with, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours of work a week. It like that was the first example for me when I started to be like, oh, this is actually one of the highest leverage activities that you could do, period.
Yeah.
Have there been any of those that you have seen, or like how would you, like my mind goes of like, all right, what is the um like who are the hardest customers to get, or who are the most expensive customers? But I don't think that has to be the way. It's just like, what are the different problems that you see for any given specific workflow? Are there any other like specific industries that stick out that have a real problem with some of this automations?
Yeah, it's a good question. And for people who are listening, I'm like nodding my head vigorously while he's explaining this, because there's a lot of these automations where, you can now use OpenAI to do either binary decision making or saying, is this lead qualified or not? And then
Mm,
follow different paths for that. You can do categorization. So, like, is this support ticket supposed to go to the sales team or the fulfillment team or the product team or the founder? Like, that's categorization, and normally that'd have to be a human, but now we have OpenAI in the middle, which is really helpful. So there's a lot that you can do there. But the thing that you asked about industries, and one thing that I'm really thinking a lot about with our agency is that I don't believe that there's any one industry that needs it the most, right? Because so many companies have processes that take humans to move data between point A and point B. And so when we can look at a law firm, right, they are creating tickets in Outlook, and maybe you want those tickets to show up in ClickUp, and that's an automation. Maybe they are, everyone has invoicing problems. And even if you're not invoicing a service, you might be invoicing or moving revenue from Stripe to QuickBooks for, I use the purse example, like an e-com thing. So you still have to recognize that revenue somewhere else. And when someone purchases, you're probably going to want to send a thank you email, right? And then put them into a nurture flow. And that might take place in MailChimp or something. So
hmm
we're always moving data between point A and point B. And I think that there is no industry that's immune from this. There's definitely industries that need it more, the real service-based businesses, because there are so many human touch points. And the last thing that I'll add on this is that you mentioned like it's one of the highest ROI activities you can do. I kind of call it like these leveraged work states. So if you go into a sales team or into an accounting team and you automate as much of the copying and pasting as possible, we are now allowing that bookkeeper or that sales rep to work in a leverage state where they're only focusing on the thing that they enjoy, the thing that really moves the needle, right? And all the kind of busy work that ultimately makes people burnt out and not want to show up to work, of like, oh, I have to move data for 4 hours. They don't have to
hmm
do that anymore. And it makes them happier, and it makes retention higher for employees. So there's so many benefits beyond just like the number of minutes you save and then the relationship to the hourly rate. There's so many benefits: less context switching, higher employee retention. I mean, I could go on. I think it's, as you said, a very high ROI activity.
Right, right. Yeah, and so transitioning, I guess, to talk about some specific tools and different workflows for people.
Hmm.
The So for someone listening to this, perhaps who is a solopreneur or a founder, and has some maybe revenue coming in, but is unsure where to get started on this, or like what even to automate. One suggestion perhaps is just like write down all your problems. Is there any other way that like um, that this person could get started to, like, in any other, like, I really like the practical nature of, okay, everybody could just do the to-do list thing and put that on their home screen for their phone. How about more for like a business owner? I think I've heard you talk about looking at maybe some of your connecting your Stripe account into Airtable, or how do you look at it?
Yeah. So Airtable is one of my favorite products for data, spreadsheets, that whole world. I think it's leaps and bounds better than Google Sheets. But a great project that I think someone can take on for their business is to use a tool called like FinTable, which is FIN table, I think .io, but I'll have to double check on that. And what they do is they allow you to connect your bank accounts to Airtable, And so the reason that this is so powerful is because A, there's a template, so it's pretty plug and play to get it turned on. But then your the benefit or the value of this tool is really capped at your imagination, because we all kind of know which KPIs and metrics we want to keep track of. So you can look at how much money did I spend in the last month, or how much money did I spend in the last year. You can group by month. You can group by type of expense. You can build a dashboard. You can build internal automation. So like my fin table to Airtable, that little connection, sends me every Monday a summary of all my bank balances. So I know what the financial health of my company is. And that is so valuable to me. I don't have to be looking at my bank accounts every week, or every day, which I think is really nice. So FinTable and Airtable is another one of those like really great intro projects to Airtable that allows you to get a better understanding of your business's financial health, but also lets you use the full range of Airtable's offerings. So if the project or the task to-do list automation is kind of like the Zapier training ground, I would say that the FinTable Airtable thing is kind of the business Airtable training ground.
Right. And just looked up, it is fintable.io, and it actually is on AppSumo right now for a
Oh,
lifetime deal.
nice.
So we'll have to get you on there if you're paying monthly. And
Yeah.
the any other okay, so those sort of seem to be pillar ones for individuals starting out or for business owners starting out. How about just like if we were to walk through some of these, like in general, I was telling you earlier, like for the most part, I always think that the tool doesn't really matter. You just start to get going for most things. However, in this space, the tool actually is quite important, or at least some of them, of where for to generate ideas. And so, if we could sort of walk through, um, I guess for each component of what you would maybe automate for. If you want to find a lead, maybe go to something like Apollo, or if you want to scrape a database, or scrape LinkedIn, what you would use, or if you wanted to, insert your core things that you find yourself setting up automations for. Like, what would a couple of those sound like?
Yeah. So we talked about data for Airtable, integrations, the thing that makes all your apps talk to each other, Zapier and Make. The quick summary on that: Zapier is a lot easier to use, a little bit more expensive, but it connects with just about everything. Make is a little bit more technical, harder to use, cheaper, but a lot more powerful. So you can kind of decide. I recommend most people, if you're starting, go Zapier. It's worth it. Easy UI, just get in there. Um, Apollo is great for leads. There's a tool I love for social media scraping and kind of getting more out of your content game, which is called Phantom Buster. So I love that one. I hear QuickBooks for accounting all the time. Beehive for newsletters. Tricky thing about Beehive, the integrations are only on Make, so be aware of that. But that's why we exist. No. Yeah, there's a lot of tools. ClickUp for project management. If you're ever looking at your tech stack, look at the integrations page, and you'll likely see Zapier. You might see HubSpot. Some of these tools. But the other thing I'll challenge you to do is look also at the internal automation. So like Airtable has fantastic internal automation. ClickUp has fantastic internal automation, meaning the data within ClickUp, it doesn't need to leave ClickUp to be
Mm,
manipulated, appended, moved, whereas a tool like Asana doesn't have as good of internal automation. So these are some of like the nuances that we really look for, and we try to like steer our clients in the right direction of, but they're all personal preference at the end of the day. So, and as you said, the tool, it doesn't matter that much as long as you're happy with it and you get the most out of it. Um, but there are definitely nuances when you have kind of like that automator's frame of mind when you're looking at these.
right. And so now you're out on your own. What were like the first three automations you set up to get your business going? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I use a tool called Superpowered. That's for my meeting notes. And so Superpowered will take, kind of just like an audio file of your meetings and then put it into a summary. And so I synced that to my CRM, which lives in Airtable, and my Google Calendar is also synced to Airtable. So now when I finish a meeting, it finds the event ID from Google Calendar and saves those notes automatically, which is amazing for
Mm,
me. Um, onboarding is just a continuous process of improvement. I think that's going to be my mantra. Just actually, my mantra is matone dopo matone, which is Italian for brick by brick. And so I use that to describe how I am always thinking about continuous process improvement for
mm,
ourselves. Client onboarding is always going to be number one. I want to make someone feel really good about the investment they just made. So we're always trying to think about how we can level up that experience. Um, and then one more tactical one would probably be, yeah, I love that fin table example. Sending me an email every day of my account balances, super helpful. And then the biggest purchases too. So I make sure nothing slips by me. If something is over $100, I definitely want to know.
nice. Dude, I would love to just like watch you work for a couple hours and just see all these automations that you've built for yourself. That's awesome.
Yeah, would
Another
be
thing
happy to.
I was thinking about too is I'm gonna pick on Isaac, who is a friend of mine and also runs a videographer business here, and I've worked with him with a lot of video stuff, and he's excellent at what he does, and the nature of his work is very offline, right? He's literally a videographer. He sets up all the equipment. We have like a podcast studio here in town that he helps with, and that is his zone of genius. What is not his zone of genius is invoicing me. And I've told him, I was like, dude, you can like make this way easier on yourself and set up just a simple system where it sends you a form or a link to a Google Sheet. And he just doesn't really know where to start with that. And I haven't even dug into them. I was thinking before this call, I was like, oh, maybe that will be a good intro project, or where I could, or he could listen to this and set it up for himself. So, if you, what would be your recommendation for somebody like Isaac, where he has the pain point of he is going around constantly to a bunch of filming gigs, and he just keeps it in a like a note on his phone of his
Mhm.
hours and the days, and then he wants to take that and to put it into an invoice. Is there anything that sticks out in that process for you?
Yeah, I think what I would, knowing what I know, first thing I would do is put a weekly reminder on his calendar to do invoicing. I think that's going to be the big one is to remember to do it.
Yeah.
And then from there, because I imagine he's probably not using a Slack, he's a solopreneur type of person, right?
I think he has Slack, but maybe more so for clients, not like he's like a guest in the AppSimo Slack rather than having its own. I think.
Gotcha. I was going to say you could always send yourself a Slack memo or Slack notification off of that Google Calendar thing, but then I would probably use a very similar system to how we talked about the to-do list. So I would
Yeah.
say, create the form in Google Forms once that is submitted, and the fields then are now like how many hours did you work? If there's a rate, you could have a drop down for like, is it a $200 an hour, $100 an hour, $50 an hour project? So you can put the hours you worked, the rate selection, the name of the client, and then you could probably, just based on name of the client, there's a way to do like a lookup table. So you could grab their email address and then from the lookup table and send that information. So try to, always trying to do the least possible. Like, let's be lazy if we're going to be leveraged, right? So
Mm.
least possible amount of information from the form to make it work. And then we'll pull in that email address. We'll do a calculation for the rate value in Google Sheets. And then once you have that Google Sheet row created with the calculation of how much the invoice should be for, you can use new Google Sheet row as your trigger, and then that will trigger an automation that says create an invoice in QuickBooks or create an invoice in Stripe, depending on what platform he's using. But I think that's a pretty good thing to do, and honestly, make it even easier on the Google Calendar event in the description or the location. Put the link to the form so that it's there and it's always present. And it does like put it everywhere, plaster it everywhere so that it's super apparent that he needs to do that. Fill it out the form 5 times, and that'll trigger 5 invoices, and he's good to go.
Right. And maybe you could have a secondary, just get something going, could optimize it later, but maybe there's a secondary one
Totally.
where all this stuff is sent to a sheet, and then towards the end of the month, it sends him an email with the link to the sheet broken out by client that says, here's the invoice for the month. Does this look good? Then he could forward that to me and say, hey, is this good? Then I'll invoice it. Or something
100%.
like that, depending on it. Yeah, that's great. I love that example. Any other before we wrap up, just a handful, a couple rapid fire questions if you got a couple minutes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you have any favorite Chrome extensions?
Ooh, yeah. The web clipper from Airtable is a pretty niche one, but I've been using that to store. I've got like 120 or so AI tools that I'm just tracking as a lurker, and I use that to take information from their sites. So that one's awesome. And then color picker for hex colors, always a favorite, and export tabs. That is a lifesaver too.
For the web clipper, can you describe a little bit how you use that and what?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So yeah, there's an extension in Airtable. Airtable's got like this store of kind of extension apps that you can add to your Airtable base, and one of them's called Web Clipper. And so it's a Chrome extension. I click on it, and I've already programmed it to pull the website URL, to pull the metadata description, and then those go into fields. And then I've got an attachment for a screenshot of their landing page. So then in Airtable, I've kind of got this gallery of all of these beautiful SaaS tool landing pages. So that's fun for like a swipe file too.
Mm,
Um, and then I'm also, it allows you to pull images off of websites in ways that you normally wouldn't. So it recognizes a certain like file embed. So then I'm taking a lot of their images from their site and using that for content down the road because they obviously want to share it with people. And so I'm trying to increase that and also get a little win-win for both of us.
right. Um, in terms of like what are some of the sources that you learn from? Are they specific people? Is it setting up some of these systems like, oh, you're going to save this web clip this and then go research it later, or how do you learn some of this stuff?
I'm in a few communities. So there's like the no code operations community. There's content leverage by Mike Cardona. I love that one. But honestly, like something that we were talking about before is this idea of just start where you are, right? So like start with the 5 if then statements, start with the 2 automations we've talked about, start there. And then as you start to find, like your brain starts to see automation, that will take you pretty far because you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I could automate this and I could do this. And then you get deeper into the documentation, you get deeper into the forums, you're starting asking questions in the forums, and you're just letting your curiosity take you. And for me, it was curiosity mixed with someone was like, hey, I need these things done. So that helped. But like that is more than enough to guide you on your learning journey to build more automations. I wholeheartedly believe that. Start with what you got, and you can really go and learn a lot. Like the web clipper, I learned about that just from the need of I need to pull information into Airtable. Is there any other way to do that? Google search or Perplexity search and everything.
Mm. Here's a question, maybe a curveball for you, but let's take a
Mhm.
random person that's very, very much offline, and walk through real quick. So let's take a farmer, for example, who is perhaps maybe technical in the field with gadgets and whatnot, but very non-technical on the laptop. Like, I'm sure that they have all sorts of problems that you could spend a day with them and completely change their life and business. How would you even approach that?
Yeah, good question. So step one, so we have an audit process. I'm a little bit prepared because we do audits for a living, right?
Nice.
So step one is write out the whole tech stack. So what are you using to invoice? What are you using for accounting? There's gotta like you have to have some sort of technology behind that, unless they're doing all
Hmm.
paper receipts. From there, you go zapier.com/apps and search all the triggers and actions and see if they're available.
Mm.
Because if we don't have APIs available or like the public access ones, sometimes you can use kind of the ones that the company publishes and you get a little more technical. But for the purpose of this conversation, staying in no code, you want to find what's available to you. And then you can start looking at the triggers with, I would sit down with that farmer and go, hey, does this look like something you do? Do you create invoices every week or every month? Do you need to send any packages? Like, do you need to print shipping labels? Maybe like there's a way that we can generate shipping labels faster for you. And just going through that, all of their tech stack, and trying to get the juices flowing for them, of like, because they're it's this whole thing of, I call it exposure therapy. It's like we just need to expose people to what's possible, then the wheels start turning, and all of a sudden you've got curiosity driving a rabbit hole that lasts 8 days and you don't get anything done. Like, that's the dream.
Mm,
So it's all about tech stack, what's available, what looks familiar, let's build.
right. Um, yeah, that's given me so many just ideas in general of how to audit ourselves, or things around us. Of okay, here are the three tools, whether whatever they are, and then just poking around, and like you said,
Yeah.
go in there, see most common automations. And I was just this morning playing around, getting stuck in Airtable, and just typing out in ChatGPT. That's a good thing about Airtable. It's like very, very simple instructions, and you could get stuck, ask ChatGPT specific next steps
Hmm.
to help nudge you along. Um, I know we got to wrap up, but before we go, where can people find you, Grant?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. It was super fun. I love jamming on this stuff. So, LinkedIn and Twitter, if you just search my name, so Grant, and then Hushek is Hushek. I'm one of one, so I shouldn't be too hard to find. And then the website for the consultancy agency is grantbot.com,
Nice. And
or
then
.co. Whew,
.co.
no M.
grantbot.co. We'll put in the show notes. And yeah, maybe that's a good. Do you have stuff for how people should audit their tech stack on your website, or anything like content lead gen for you? I feel like that makes sense. Maybe.
Yeah, right now. So I'm making the final edits to the website. Well, final edits for this month to the website, and then I'm putting in some lead magnet type things of, like, essentially publishing our audit document and making it really nicely formatted, so that in a perfect world you can kind of take the results and give it to ChatGPT and see if it has any recommendations for you. And
Mm,
then if you would like to work with a human, you can come to us and we can take your audit document and turn it into automations and kind of skip a good chunk of the process. So hopefully we'll have that out by, let's say, I'll put it on the record for the 15th of May.
15th of May. Okay, we're recording this on the 22nd of April. So we got a couple weeks here, but awesome, dude. This was really, really awesome. Enjoyed hearing the way that you think, and it's given me a ton of ideas. You dropped a bunch of specific tools and ways other people can get started too. So we'll link you and everything in the show notes. Any last parting words you want to give people, whether words of wisdom or a challenge of something for them to do for themselves, or just anything that comes to mind?
As Noah says, if you said, just get started, matone dopo matone, you're going to get there. It's just the process.
Hell yeah, dude. Awesome. Grant Hutchik. Everyone
Thanks so
check
much
him
for having
out.
me.
Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Absolutely.